Good morning, and thank you for joining us. We're gathered here on the traditional territories of the signatories to Treaty 7, and I'd like to acknowledge the Métis people of Alberta who share a very deep connection to this land. Joining me today is Dr. Luann Metz, our Alberta NDP critic for health. Last week, Danielle Smith and the UCP revealed the 2024 budget, and it was built on a mountain of broken promises. Not only did the budget fail to address the chaotic mess the UCP has made of our healthcare and our schools, it failed to deliver the affordability that Alberta families desperately need. This is especially true when it comes to Albertans' largest expense, their housing. Calgarians and families across the province are dealing with the steepest rent increases in the country. But Danielle Smith's budget fails to take any meaningful action on the housing crisis her government has helped create. And it actually makes the dream of home ownership more expensive at a time when people are already struggling to afford it. After canceling her tax cut that promised $1,500 to Alberta households, she instead is tacking on an additional $550 fee for those households when Albertans go to purchase a modest home. But that's not all. With a growing population seeking a roof over their heads and an escalating housing crisis, the UCP's own fiscal plan just doesn't cut it. It offers nothing to help stop the skyrocketing rent increases. And this comes after 5 years of attacks on housing funding by the UCP, where they cut the budget for rental assistance programs, the Indigenous Housing Capital Program, maintenance and renewal funding, and even housing management bodies funding. Let's not forget, fewer Albertans receive rental assistance in the UCP's first term after those massive cuts. And now they're not even going to meet their own lowball target of who needs support. That means this budget confirms yet another broken promise. The UCP's so-called housing strategy, Stronger Foundations they call it, which is already woefully inadequate, won't offer much support for Albertans who need help paying these skyrocketing rents. This strategy calls for 1,200 new households a year to get access to rental assistance. It's woefully inadequate, but nonetheless, the budget itself will actually only assist 550. So they're breaking their promise to what is in actual fact the thousands and thousands and thousands of households across this province that are sitting on the wait list hoping to get support. Why is this important? In Calgary alone, there are over 115,000 people at high risk of houselessness. Rents in Alberta in the last year alone have gone up 18%. On average, that means renters have seen their rent go up over $300 a month. That's a huge number for people struggling to pay the bills at the end of each month. So the UCP did have a choice in this budget. They could have made sure that at a bare minimum, they at least met their own targets. Instead, as I said, they only chose 550 new households to receive rent supplements. And, as I said, they chose a new fee for those who are seeking to buy a modest home of $550. And finally, on housing, when it comes to building new affordable housing stock, while the minister loves to throw around wild numbers that are, quite frankly, not even worthy of being repeated, the fact is the budget projects a fraction of what is needed to be spent to catch up on our affordable housing pressures. Now, there could have been another strategy. The Alberta NDP's Bill 205, the Housing Security Act, would immediately address the matter of skyrocketing rents. Janice Irwin, our critic in housing, is championing this bill this coming Monday because it's the solution to help renters right now without any programs to apply for or hoops to jump through. On top of an emergency and temporary rent cap, Bill 205 also calls for an increased reporting on housing targets to ensure that Albertans will get a transparent understanding of efforts to address the housing crisis. Now, before I finish, let me just review very quickly a few other broken promises and the other lies that the UCP have been telling of late. Last week, the UCP announced they'd be building a multitude of schools across the province. Turns out they were just announcing previously committed projects almost entirely. In fact, yesterday, we learned the Calgary Board of Education will receive just one new school this year. Just one. The UCP are simply not building enough schools and are continuing to lie to Albertans about their progress on that. Here in Calgary, Cornerstone, Redstone, Whitehorn, and the modernization of Annie Gale School have been needed for years, and they've been ignored by the UCP. And then today, the Minister of Education carried on with this campaign of confusion and misinformation, suggesting that Albertans should somehow celebrate a $6 million increase to PUF funding. That's funding for kids with special needs. But here's the thing. The UCP actually cut over $90 million from this incredibly important program just 3 years ago, leaving special needs students with extra learning needs without support for those 3 years all across the province. So the minister's announcement today was cynical and dishonest, and quite frankly, he should be ashamed of the way he tried to frame it. The future and lives of thousands of kids with special learning needs across this province have been permanently damaged by the cuts the UCP imposed 4 years ago, and this government needs to take responsibility for that choice. So those lies and broken promises, they also extend to healthcare. And to say just a little bit more about that, let me pass it over to our health critic, Lou-Anne Metz.
1 year ago today, in her Say Anything to Get Elected season, Danielle Smith promised to ensure that every Albertan would get the surgeries they need within the recommended wait times. She said she was absolutely confident that the wait list would be completely eliminated. Well, she lied. The only reduction to the number of Albertans struggling on the wait list comes from the way in which the UCP counts them. Otherwise, progress has been non-existent. She broke her promise, and this morning, her health minister suggested expectations had been set too high. Let's be clear, having the surgery you need isn't some sort of unreasonable expectation. It's what Albertans deserve from the public healthcare system. Now, let's go back to Rachel.
So in summary, this budget shows the UCP is doing two things. First, they're breaking their promises. And second, they're lying about them as their default position. So thank you very much. And either of us are happy to take any questions folks might have.
Thank you, Rachel. We'll start with questions in person. Just state your name and outlet.
Hi, this is Hiren Manzukani with the Calgary Herald. I was wondering if you could talk to me about the affordable housing numbers, the funding that was released by the federal government, the provincial government, UCP. It said around 717 million was, kind of doled out to, affordable housing, and then 257 million was given to, social housing. And I was wondering, how do you kind of make sense of that? You kind of addressed that in your speech.
Right. So the bottom line is that there's been a minimum level of funding for affordable housing for some time. Often what we're seeing now is the minister just re-announcing things that's always been there. He has in the past suggested that this government would invest 3 or 4 times that amount over the next, at this point, I believe, 9 years. Yet, if you look in the budget for the out years, they're nowhere close to meeting the pace of funding that the minister claims that they are going to contribute. In addition, he's rolling up a whole bunch of different programs all into one. So we're talking about affordable housing. He's talking about seniors housing and continuing care. And it's not that those aren't important, but separate them out. Don't try to confuse Albertans by pushing them all together. In addition, we know that the federal government is coming to the table right now with a lot of money for affordable housing. And the provincial government is steadfastly refusing to work with them in concert with municipalities to grow the amount of affordable housing across the province. So all of that's happening at the same time that the rent supplement actually took a whole bunch of cuts during the first 3 years of the UCP's government. So we're just now clawing our way back up to where we were. And they've also kicked a whole bunch, thousands and thousands of people on income support. They've terminated their rent subsidy program, which is a whole different thing. So taken together, this is an approach to housing by this provincial government, which is letting Albertans down at a time when our housing costs are exploding in a way that we haven't seen since about 2007, 2008.
Yeah. In your bill, there's rate caps, and I was curious about how you think this bill would go about addressing another problem that we see in BC, which they call renovictions, that people actually evict people, saying that there's renovations to hike up the rent. How does that bill address that loophole or that problem?
Well, the way the bill is designed is that there isn't necessarily an opportunity to jack up the rent when someone leaves. But there is an ability for a landlord to apply to have the rent adjusted beyond the 5% that is set out in the legislation, but it has to be an application where they have to make their case. So that's the idea around how it would work. I mean, our market is very, very different than the market on the Lower Mainland because, of course, the Lower Mainland ran out of room to build about 30 years ago or something like that. It's very constrained. Our market is different, but what is true is that we are pretty much the only province with a growing population and significant rent pressures that doesn't have protection for renters. And so we understand there are other elements to the market and we need to look at them all holistically. But in the short term, there's an emergency. Folks on fixed incomes cannot sustain the rate of increase that they are being presented with right now.
Any other questions in person? All right, well, now we'll go to the phones. Just a reminder for those joining us on the phone to use the *9 function, and for those joining us on Zoom to use the raise hand function to get into the question queue. And with no questions in the queue, we'll wrap today. Thanks, folks.
Thank you very much.